What if Anakin literally took a seat and walked out with it? What would happen then? Let's find out. So, in this odd timeline, Anakin wouldn't exactly be doing well mentally. This happened because after Ahsoka's departure, Anakin felt an overwhelming sense of loss and abandonment. Her leaving left a void in his life, and he struggled to cope with the feelings of loneliness. He had always relied on Ahsoka as both a friend and a grounding influence, and without her, he felt like he had lost an important part of himself. To numb the pain and silence the turmoil in his mind, Anakin turned to death sticks, seeking some semblance of peace. Initially, they seemed harmless, but over time, the death sticks took a toll on him. The effects were insidious, slowly eroding his body, clouding his mind, and most crucially, weakening his connection to the Force. His once natural and fluid connection to the Force became strained, and he found himself having to concentrate much harder to achieve what used to come effortlessly. By the time the events of Revenge of the Sith took place, the effects of the death sticks were becoming more obvious. In the heat of battle, Anakin was still able to perform well, the thrill of piloting and combat keeping him sharp and focused. However, outside of those moments, Anakin wasn't himself. He often seemed lost in his own thoughts, his mind foggy and distracted. He was more irritable, more prone to outbursts, and it was clear to those close to him that something was wrong. He had become addicted to the death sticks, to the point that even after seeing Ahsoka again, Anakin still couldn't quit. Even the hope of reconnecting with her, of proving himself once again, wasn't enough to break the hold the death sticks had over him. In this timeline too, the rescue of Palpatine was a success, and Anakin and Obi-Wan managed to save him from General Grievous. But it was after this that the effects of the death sticks began significantly altering the timeline. Just like in the original timeline, Anakin went to see Padme after the rescue. However, unlike the original timeline, due to his weakened connection to the Force, he did not have any vision of Padme dying. Instead, he heard something, a sound that almost seemed like Yoda screaming. Anakin woke up in a sweat, disoriented and confused. He tried to make sense of what he had heard, but it was so fleeting and vague that he couldn't figure it out. His heart was pounding, and a sense of unease settled over him. Anakin then quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Padme. He made his way to the veranda, the cool night air of Coruscant brushing against his face. He reached for the death sticks, which he had hidden in a secret compartment built into his lightsaber. Padme had of course noticed the change in Anakin, but since they didn't meet often due to the war, she had no idea why Anakin was acting the way he did, and had assumed it was just the stress from the war. Anakin knew she was concerned, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. The death sticks had become his crutch, something he relied on to keep the chaos in his mind at bay. He mixed the death stick fluid into a drink while standing on the veranda, staring out at the sprawling lights of Coruscant below. He consumed the drink, feeling the familiar numbness wash over him, dulling the edges of his thoughts. The effect was almost immediate, and he felt his muscles relax as the tension drained away. As he indulged in the stick fluid, he became zoned out, his mind drifting to nowhere in particular. The haze felt comforting, like a temporary escape from everything weighing on him. Suddenly, he jolted back to the present when he heard Padme knock over something as she walked towards him. Quickly, Anakin threw the drink off the veranda opening, his heart racing. The fear of getting caught gripped him for a moment, but he tried to calm himself. As Padme approached, her eyes still heavy with sleep, she asked if he was all right. "I'm just stressed from all the deaths from the war, Padme." As they spoke, Anakin heard what sounded like a speeder crash below. Anakin considered for a moment if the drink he threw caused the crash, but quickly dismissed it with a mental nah. Padme gave him a sympathetic look, placing a gentle hand on his arm, and they went back to bed. Anakin's thoughts remained troubled. He stared at the ceiling as he lay in bed, the unsettling feeling lingering in the background. The next morning, Anakin woke up late, feeling groggy and disconnected. Padme was already gone, having left early to head to the executive building for her duties. She had let Anakin sleep, wanting him to get some rest after everything he'd been through. Anakin dragged himself out of bed, his body heavy, and he soon noticed a missed transmission on his holocom. It was from Obi-Wan. With a sigh, Anakin played the recorded transmission, Obi-Wan's voice filling the room. It was a reminder about an important report on the Outer Rim sieges that would be discussed in a meeting at the temple. Anakin groaned, realizing he was already late. He reluctantly got ready and made his way to the Jedi Temple, every step feeling like a chore. The exhaustion and mental fog from the previous night clung to him, making it difficult to focus. By the time he arrived at the temple, he had already missed the meeting. Frustration gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside as he searched for Obi-Wan. He eventually found Obi-Wan in one of the corridors, the older Jedi looking concerned as soon as he saw Anakin. "Anakin, are you all right?" Obi-Wan asked, his eyes searching Anakin's face. Anakin forced a smile, trying to appear unaffected. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." he replied. Obi-Wan didn't seem entirely convinced, but he let it slide. He handed Anakin a datapad and said, "Palpatine has requested your presence. He wants to discuss something with you." Anakin frowned, feeling a surge of annoyance. All he wanted was to go to his quarters in the temple and sleep some more. But duty called, and he knew he couldn't ignore a summons from the Chancellor. When he arrived, Palpatine greeted him warmly, immediately launching into a discussion about the Jedi Council, their decisions, and trust within the Order. Anakin tried to pay attention, but his mind was hazy, the words blurring together. Jedi Council this, Jedi Council that. Does this man not have anything else to say? Anakin thought. Palpatine's words began to fade into the background, and Anakin found himself zoning out, his gaze drifting to the ornate decorations in the room. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Palpatine's expression change, the Chancellor pausing mid-sentence, before reaching out and shaking Anakin's shoulder gently. "Anakin?" Palpatine said, his voice snapping Anakin back to the present. He nodded, pretending to have been listening the whole time, though Palpatine's knowing smile suggested otherwise. Palpatine then leaned back in his chair, giving Anakin a measured look before speaking. "Anakin, I want you to be my personal representative on the Jedi Council," he said. Anakin paused, his already clouded mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. He wondered for a moment if he was hearing things again, like the mysterious screaming sound from last night. Hearing Palpatine's plan, Anakin wondered if Yoda would scream upon hearing about him being appointed to the council, and if that scream was what he heard in the vision or hallucination or whatever that was last night. He could just imagine Yoda screaming, "Skywalker, what the criff is this?" Anakin stifled a laugh at the thought, shaking his head slightly. I don't know how this is going to turn out," he muttered, half to himself. Palpatine raised an eyebrow at Anakin's half-hearted response. "Don't you think it's time you took your place among the leaders of the Jedi, my boy?" Anakin tried to smile, but it came out more as a grimace. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled, still distracted by the image of Yoda screaming in his head. Palpatine continued with his plans, laying out how Anakin should handle the council, and the more he spoke, the more Anakin found himself zoning out again. Palpatine paused, looking at Anakin expectantly. "Anakin?" "Oh yeah, absolutely," Anakin said, hoping that was the right answer. Palpatine looked amused, but thankfully continued. Finally, after what felt like hours of Jedi bashing and not-so-subtle suggestions, the meeting wrapped up. Anakin got to his feet. "I will represent you well, Chancellor," Anakin said, though all he could think was how he wanted nothing more than to flop into his bed and sleep for a week. "I know you will, my boy," Palpatine said, with that warm yet calculating smile of his. As Anakin turned to leave, he couldn't help but think that maybe Yoda really would scream about this, and maybe, just maybe, Anakin might actually enjoy that. Soon enough, the scene shifted, and Anakin found himself standing before the Jedi Council. They were deep in discussion about Anakin being appointed to the council as Palpatine's representative. Yoda finally spoke up. "Allow this appointment lightly. The council does not." Anakin tried to look serious and nodded. "I understand, Master Yoda," he said, trying to sound sincere, even though his mind was growing foggier from the death stick fluid he had consumed just before the meeting. Mace Windu's gaze was sharp as he spoke. "You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of Master," he declared, his tone making it clear that this was non-negotiable. So, quick side note, in the original timeline, Anakin had been furious at not being granted the rank of Master. This was because he had planned to use access to the restricted temple archives to find a way to save Padme, believing that hidden knowledge on saving her could be found there. Only Masters had access to the restricted section of the archives, and so being denied the rank of Master had been a devastating blow in the original timeline. But here, in this altered timeline, Anakin hadn't even had a vision of Padme dying, so he couldn't care less about being denied the rank of Master. Anakin blinked, realizing he had zoned out again. He hadn't heard a word of what Mace had said. "I'm sorry, what?" Anakin asked, his voice flat. "Take a seat, young Skywalker," he said. Anakin stood there, his mind muddled, and the effects of the death sticks making it hard to think clearly. He could feel the eyes of the entire council on him, waiting. Obi-Wan gave him a subtle shake of his head, a silent plea to just go along with it. Yoda stared down at his walking stick, as if contemplating something deeply. Mace's irritation was evident, his eyes hardening as he watched Anakin. At that point, something broke inside Anakin. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the death sticks, or simply his patience finally snapping. In that dazed state, he moved towards an empty council seat. Without saying a word, he reached out with both his arms and the Force, and with a sudden burst of strength, ripped the seat out of its place. The sound of metal tearing echoed through the council chamber as Anakin, his face devoid of emotion, lifted the chair and began to walk out of the room. The entire council sat in stunned silence, watching as Anakin made his way to the exit. Not a single word was spoken. Even Mace Windu, who was usually quick to voice his displeasure, seemed too shocked to react. As the door closed behind Anakin, Mace turned to look at Obi-Wan. The rest of the council, who rarely spoke during these meetings anyway, shared similar looks of bewilderment, their eyes shifting between each other as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. "I told you there was something going on with him," Obi-Wan said, breaking the silence that hung in the council chamber. "Yeah, I see that now," Mace replied. "Do you have any idea what's going on? Did he hit his head or something?" Yoda, who had been quietly observing the entire scene, let out a snicker, drawing the attention of the others. "Relying on mind expansion items, young Skywalker might be," Yoda suggested, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Mace looked. "Are you serious, Master Yoda?" he asked, clearly taken aback by the comment. Yoda nodded, unbothered by the incredulous stares of his fellow council members. "Yes, true this could be," he said. "Observed, I have. Changes in young Skywalker's behavior. Agitated, distracted, often lost in thought, he seems. Symptoms these are of death stick overuse, perhaps." Yoda paused, then continued, his tone shifting as he seemed to become lost in his own thoughts. "Death sticks, insidious they are, cloud the mind and weaken the connection to the Force, they do. Dependence grows, until without them, empty one feels. A dangerous path young Skywalker walks." Yoda's voice then took on a strangely reflective quality, as if he were recalling something from long ago. "Not like spice. No. Spice, superior it is to death sticks. Focuses one, sharpens the mind, strengthens connection to the Force. Spice does. Reality, it brings into clearer focus." Mace's eyes widened, and he shot Yoda a disbelieving look. "Master Yoda," he began slowly, "how exactly do you know all this?" Yoda's eyes fluttered, as though snapping out of a trance, and he quickly scanned the room, suddenly aware of the suspicious looks being cast his way by the rest of the council. He cleared his throat and said the following. Here I did in Holland documentary. Yes. Celebrity. Court using spice they were. Topic of documentary that was. Informed I am of spice, only because of that," he said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. There was a moment of silence before Ki-Adi-Mundi cleared his throat. "I see," he said, though his tone suggested that he wasn't entirely convinced. Mundi then turned towards Mace and asked, "Do you believe Skywalker is utilizing mind expansion products like the Grand Master suggests, Master Windu?" Mace turned to Obi-Wan. "Why would he do this?" he asked, genuinely baffled. Yoda let out a soft chuckle before cutting in. "Perhaps problems with his girlfriend Skywalker has." Obi-Wan's breath hitched, and he gave Yoda a startled glance. "Girlfriend? What do you mean, Master Yoda?" Obi-Wan asked. Yoda gave Obi-Wan a knowing look. "Know about it, everyone does, Master Obi-Wan. From the High Council to young Jar Jar Binks. Aware we are of Skywalker's relationship with Padme Amidala. Care about it, no one does. Master Mundi, married he is, yes? Hypocrisy, none there is." The room fell into an awkward silence, and then, without acknowledging Anakin's open secret that was now even more out in the open, Obi-Wan broke the silence. "So, given Anakin's complications, should we change our strategy?" Mace looked at Obi-Wan. "We stick to the plan. Anakin is supposed to report on the Chancellor's dealings. We need to keep him focused on that. If Anakin is chewing on some herbs, then we should find it and take it away." Obi-Wan frowned, clearly troubled. Where would he likely keep something like that, if that is the case? Before anyone else could respond, Yoda jumped in. "A lightsaber. A good place it is to store death sticks." He nodded to himself, but then noticed the entire council staring at him with suspicion again, and he fell silent. Mace exhaled heavily, sinking back into his chair. "Is there anything else we need to discuss?" he asked, sounding weary. Ki-Adi-Mundi, who had remained mostly silent, looked over at Yoda. "What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?" he asked. Yoda remained silent. He knew Mundi was trying to send him away to that spider-infested forest of Kashyyyk. He stared back at Mundi, but said nothing. "Master Yoda," Mundi continued, his voice calm but insistent. "You have good relations with the Wookiees, do you not? Will you go?" Yoda's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself. "Good relations with your mother I have as well. Visit her too I should, He didn't say it aloud, of course. The Grand Master shifted slightly on his seat, trying to come up with a reason not to go to Kashyyyk. He had no intention of trekking through the arachnid-infested forest, no matter how good his relations were with the Wookiees. Instead, he turned towards Ajan Kolar, giving the other Jedi Master a steady look. "Master Kolar, go you must to Kashyyyk, since I do that the Force wants me on Coruscant," Yoda said, nodding as if the decision had already been made. Kolar looked startled, his brows knitting together in confusion. Master Yoda, with all due respect, I think it would be better if I stayed here on Coruscant. He glanced at Mace Windu for support, adding, if Darth Sidious is discovered, I am best suited to deal with him. It's true, Master Kolar is well suited to deal with any threat posed by Sidious. Mace then looked towards Yoda, adding, Master Yoda, it was you who decided that Kolar and I would be best suited to handle Sidious if he is discovered. Irritation crossed Yoda's features. He didn't want to argue, but there was no way he was going to Kashyyyk. He let out a sigh, pretending to consider Kolar's words. Perhaps another should go then, he said, turning towards Saesee Tiin. Master Tiin, to Kashyyyk, go you should. Saesee Tiin shook his head almost immediately. Master Yoda, I must remain here as well. My skills are required for fleet coordination in the Outer Rim. The Wookiees would be better served by someone more familiar with their customs. The council chamber fell into a strange, almost surreal silence as the members looked between each other, searching for a scapegoat. The awkwardness of the moment was almost palpable. Plo Koon then spoke, turning towards Master Mundi. Perhaps, Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, you should reconsider your stance. Given your experience with unconventional environments, perhaps you should tend to Kashyyyk and have someone else take over your duties on Mygeeto, he suggested diplomatically. Ki-Adi-Mundi frowned. I believe my expertise is better utilized on Mygeeto, coordinating with our forces here. Kashyyyk is hardly suitable for someone of my current commitments, he replied, his tone cold but polite. Mundi then looked at Shaak Ti and decided to try and send her to Kashyyyk. Let Master T try to fix that force's mistake of a world, he thought with disdain. Master T, he began, you have extensive experience in negotiating with non-human species. I believe you are the most suitable candidate for this mission. With all due respect, Master Mundi, my responsibilities are here. I have ongoing projects within the temple, and my presence is needed to oversee training initiatives, she replied. Mundi's jaw tightened, and it seemed he was about to argue further. But Shaak Ti shifted her attention to Eeth Koth, who had been quietly listening, clearly hoping to avoid being dragged into the debate. Master Koth, she said smoothly, your expertise in combat tactics could be invaluable on Kashyyyk. The Wookiees would greatly benefit from your strategic insights. Eeth Koth's gaze faltered, shaking his head vigorously. I am currently needed on Seleucami. Our forces there require coordination, and my skills are best utilized in that capacity, he said, his voice sounding almost desperate. The tension in the council chamber grew as each Jedi Master attempted to pass the assignment to someone else. Not long after, Saesee Tiin spoke up, turning to Master Adi Gallia. Master Gallia, your diplomatic expertise could be crucial in fostering positive relations with the Wookiees. Adi Gallia's eyes narrowed as she shook her head firmly. My diplomatic skills are required here on Coruscant. I have responsibilities that cannot be postponed, she replied, her tone leaving no room for debate. Mace Windu leaned back in his chair, a barely perceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He let his gaze drift upwards, staring at the ceiling as the argument carried on around him. The cacophony of voices, each trying to shift the responsibility, was almost entertaining. At least he wouldn't be the one to go to that nightmare world, Mace thought. As the argument raged on, Yoda sat in his seat, seemingly oblivious to the chaos. His eyes were half closed as he chewed on his walking stick, his small frame relaxed, as if he were entirely detached from the situation. Master Fisto, surely your aquatic combat skills could be of use in the swamps of Kashyyyk, Adi Gallia suggested, her voice sounding almost pleading. Kit Fisto let out a small laugh, shaking his head. I believe the Wookiees can manage their swamps well enough without me, he replied. The argument continued, each Jedi passing the responsibility around like a hot coal, with none willing to be burned by it. The scene dragged on endlessly, the tension and irritation mounting as no resolution was reached. Obi-Wan sighed. He could see where this was going, nowhere, and Obi-Wan decided that, frankly, he had better things to do, like making sure he didn't get dragged into this mess himself. The way things were going, it wouldn't be long before someone suggested he go to Kashyyyk. Better to slip out now and deal with Anakin instead, Obi-Wan thought. Quietly, and without drawing any attention to himself, Obi-Wan began inching towards the door. He moved carefully, sidestepping Agent Kolar and Saesee Tiin, who were gesturing wildly at each other, seemingly in a heated debate over swamp warfare. His hand found the door panel, and he quickly slipped out, the sound of the council's commotion fading behind him. He took a moment to collect himself, glancing back at the council doors. He couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. The council arguing like younglings over who had to clean the training room, Mace looking like he was mentally composing his resignation letter, and the empty space where the council seat Anakin had torn out used to be. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He had another task, to find Anakin, and task him with reporting on the Chancellor's dealings. Obi-Wan started down the hallway, the echo of his boots on the polished floor the only sound in the otherwise empty corridor. It didn't take him long to locate Anakin. He found him just downstairs, sitting on the council seat he had ripped out, positioned right in the middle of the hallway. Anakin was slouched, his expression vacant, staring off into space. The council seat, a massive, ornate chair, looked out of place in the middle of a stark corridor, and Obi-Wan couldn't help but shake his head at the ridiculousness of it. "Anakin," Obi-Wan called out. Anakin's head turned lazily, his eyes meeting Obi-Wan's with a half-hearted attempt at looking interested. "Oh, hey, Obi-Wan," Anakin mumbled, leaning back further in the chair, his arms draped over the armrests, as if he were lounging in his own quarters. "How's the meeting going?" Anakin asked. Obi-Wan looked out the large window to their left and said the following: "A disaster. Not that it matters since you decided to walk out with a piece of the council chamber. What were you thinking, Anakin? Were you thinking at all?" Anakin shrugged, barely lifting his shoulders. "I took a seat, like Master Windu said." He laughed like a bantha-brained stupa. Obi-Wan glanced at Anakin's lightsaber, remembering Yoda's suggestion that Anakin might be storing the sticks inside. But he had to focus. There were more pressing matters. "Yes, well, I'm sure Master Windu is thrilled with your interpretation of his command. But I have something more important to discuss with you. Anakin, the Chancellor wants you to report on the Council's dealings." "Wait, no, the Council wants you to report on the Chancellor's dealings." Obi-Wan stumbled over the words, his brain struggling to make sense of the nonsense that had become his life recently. It was all becoming too much. Maybe he needed a vacation, preferably somewhere that wasn't crawling with Sith Lords or Jedi Masters with their own personal spice recipes, Obi-Wan thought. Anakin sighed, rubbing his eyes with one hand, the other still resting lazily over the arm of the seat. Without a word, he used the Force to lift the seat and himself into the air, floating towards one of the large windows to their left. The sight was almost regal. Anakin, hovering in the air, slouched like some lazy baron from a distant planet, floating towards a balcony to watch his nephew fight a rigged gladiator match for his 18th birthday. Obi-Wan walked alongside the floating Anakin. When they reached the window, Anakin gently lowered the seat to the ground, settling himself down with a weary shrug. He stared out at the sprawling cityscape of Coruscant. "So, what were you saying again?" Obi-Wan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "The Council wants you to report on the Chancellor's dealings, Anakin. They need you to..." He trailed off, watching as Anakin's expression shifted. A strange mix of exhaustion and something else. Something Obi-Wan couldn't quite place. Anakin opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Against a mentor and a friend. Out of place. Treason." The words were disjointed, almost as if they were fragments of different thoughts, none of them fully formed. Obi-Wan frowned, his concern deepening. Anakin let out yet another heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping as he leaned back in the seat. Yeah, I'll do it," he muttered, his voice lacking any real conviction. He turned his head slightly, his gaze drifting back out the window, his eyes unfocused as he stared at the city beyond. Later that night, Anakin was summoned by Palpatine to the Opera House. With the effects of the Death Stick slowly wearing off, he walked with a weary determination towards the venue. The bright lights of Coruscant flashed all around him as he made his way through the bustling city. He wasn't exactly sure why Palpatine had called him there, but considering the foggy mess his brain had been in lately, he figured it was best to just go with it. The entrance to the Opera House loomed in front of him, an imposing structure filled with the elite of Coruscant. He was used to navigating in these circles, even if his current state of mind wasn't the clearest. Palpatine greeted him warmly. "Anakin, I'm glad you could make it. There's something important we must discuss." Anakin nodded, his gaze drifting momentarily to the performance below, a mesmerizing display of light and movement, almost hypnotic. He turned back to Palpatine, trying to focus. "What is it?" "Clone intelligence has discovered General Grievous on Utapau." Anakin's expression tightened as he gave a slow nod. "Utapau. Right, I'll let the Council know." He began to rise, assuming that was the reason for the meeting. "There's more, my boy," Palpatine said, his tone holding Anakin in place. He gestured to the aides and attendants nearby, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "Take a seat, Anakin," Palpatine said. Anakin seemed confused for a second before taking the now empty seat next to Palpatine. He began to speak, going on for a while about the Jedi, criticizing their decisions, questioning their motives, and painting them in a suspicious light. Anakin drifted, his mind wandering as Palpatine's words blurred into meaningless noise. Finally, noticing Anakin's inattentiveness, Palpatine cut to the chase. "The Jedi, have they asked you to spy on me?" Anakin's brow furrowed, and he looked genuinely confused for a moment. He had completely forgotten about the Council's request for him to report on Palpatine, all thanks to the Death Sticks. "No, they haven't," he said, sounding irritated. He simply wanted to watch the opera, or whatever the performance was, without this kind of intrusion. Palpatine was silent for a short while, as if considering his next words carefully, before finally speaking. "Have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?" Palpatine asked, his tone shifting, taking on a more story-like quality. Anakin paused, thinking for a long moment before shaking his head. "No, I haven't." Palpatine smiled, a strange glint in his eyes as he began to recount the tale. He spoke of the Sith Lord who had such knowledge of the dark side that he could prevent death itself, and the ultimate irony of his fate. But as the story came to an end, Palpatine's enthusiasm seemed to fade, replaced by something else, a look of curiosity, almost a hint of disappointment. He had assumed Anakin, like him, had seen a vision of Padme dying, that the fear of loss would be eating away at him. But evidently that wasn't the case. Anakin considered the story for a moment and then spoke. "If Plagueis was so wise, why is he dead? Any Force user who died in their sleep was clearly incompetent, and any apprentice of theirs is also a sleemo if he had to wait for his master to fall asleep to kill him. The only thing anyone would have to fear from such a Sith would be the drinks they give out." Palpatine said nothing for a moment. The young Jedi's irreverence was unexpected, and it made Palpatine reconsider his plans. Perhaps Anakin wasn't the ideal apprentice after all. Maybe transferring his own soul into Anakin's body would be a better course of action, Palpatine thought. "You have a unique perspective," and Anakin soon left the private chamber, the lights of Coruscant a blur as he made his way back to the temple. His thoughts were scattered, the exhaustion from the previous days still clinging to him like a shadow. But one thing was clear, Grievous was on Utapau, and that information had to be shared. When Anakin finally reached the council chamber, the debate was still raging. The council members were arguing over who would take the mission to Kashyyyk, their voices overlapping, each master trying to find a way out of the assignment. Then he noticed the missing council seat, and wondered where it had gone. Seeing no place to sit, he simply stood at the center of the council chamber. Anakin cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the council. They paused, turning to face Masters. Anakin began. "Chancellor Palpatine has received intelligence on General Grievous's location. He's hiding on Utapau." The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the information sinking in. Obi-Wan stood up, a look of determination crossing his features. He sensed the opportunity to escape from the possibility of being sent to Kashyyyk, and took it without thought. Kashyyyk was the Force's mistake, and Obi-Wan hated the place. "I'll go," Obi-Wan said quickly. He stepped forward before anyone could object. "I'll handle General Grievous. The Republic needs this threat neutralized as soon as possible." Obi-Wan practically ran out of the council chamber, his robes billowing behind him. He didn't look back, and Anakin could swear he caught a glimpse of a relieved grin on Obi-Wan's face as he disappeared through the doors. There was an almost awkward silence for a moment. Then the council members turned their attention back to each other. The conversation then returned to the ongoing debate about who would take on the mission to Kashyyyk. Meanwhile, Anakin was annoyed at having to stand. He wondered again where that one seat had gone. His eyes then drifted towards Obi-Wan's empty seat, and he found the solution to his problem. Without a word, Anakin strode over to Obi-Wan's empty seat. The council's conversation continued, seemingly oblivious to Anakin's actions. He stood before the seat for a moment, his gaze steady, then reached down and gripped the chair with both hands. In one smooth, powerful motion, he ripped it from the floor. The council members fell silent, their heads snapping around to look at Anakin as he hefted the seat into the air. Anakin carried the seat, his steps steady and deliberate, and set it down where the missing council seat had once been. He adjusted it slightly, making sure it was properly aligned, then sat down, his expression calm and unfazed. Creative, young Skywalker is," Yoda said. The rest of the council seemed to decide, collectively, to ignore what had just happened, and the discussion resumed. Once again, the topic of who would be sent to Kashyyyk was brought up, and once again, the argument began. Not long after, Obi-Wan arrived on Utapau, a look of relief on his face as he prepared to engage General Grievous. The fight was intense but short, and Obi-Wan managed to defeat Grievous with his usual finesse, blasting the cyborg's mechanical heart apart. With Grievous gone and his mission accomplished, Obi-Wan decided that heading back to Coruscant might mean he would end up being sent to Kashyyyk. No way was he going back there while the debate about who should go was still raging. He figured he might as well stick around Utapau for a bit, at least until someone else got stuck with the Kashyyyk mission. A short while before this, when news arrived that Obi-Wan had engaged Grievous, Mace Windu had decided it was time to inform Palpatine of Grievous's engagement. Turning to Anakin, he spoke sharply, "Skywalker, go and inform the Chancellor that Obi-Wan has engaged General Grievous." Anakin blinked, his mind somewhere else entirely as he stared off into space. What?" he mumbled. Mace snapped his fingers in front of Anakin's face. "Go tell Palpatine that Obi-Wan is engaging Grievous. Oh, right. Yeah, got it, he said, getting to his feet. Without further delay, he made his way to Palpatine's office. Though his steps were a little unsteady, he was still feeling the effects of his last Death Stick session. Entering the Chancellor's office, Anakin was greeted by Palpatine's warm smile. "Anakin, my boy, what news do you bring?" Palpatine asked. Anakin rubbed the back of his neck, trying to remember what Mace had told him. Obi-Wan's engaging Grievous on Utapau," he said, the words coming out in a lazy drawl. Palpatine's eyes narrowed slightly, and he decided that it was time to set his final plan in motion. He needed to destroy the Jedi and catch Anakin, to keep him in stasis until he could transfer his soul into the young Jedi's body. He leaned forward, his expression growing more intense. "The time has come, Anakin. I must reveal to you that I am not what I seem." Anakin stared at him blankly, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of Palpatine's words. "Uh-huh," he muttered. Palpatine sighed, leaning forward, his voice dropping as he spoke again. "The dark side, Anakin. I have knowledge of the dark side." Anakin shifted, a confused look crossing his face. What do you mean, like, you studied it, or something? I don't understand." Palpatine's frustration was palpable, his tone growing sharper. "No, Anakin, I am the Sith Lord, the one you've been looking for." "Sith Lord, like, you're evil?" Palpatine took a deep breath, his patience wearing thin. "Yes, Anakin, I am Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord behind everything." Anakin's expression turned into one of confusion, mixed with a hint of apathy. "Oh," he said, shrugging. "Okay, what do you want me to do with that info?" Palpatine stared at Anakin. "Go tell the Jedi, Anakin." Anakin nodded. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled, turning and walking out of the office. Anakin felt too tired to bother flying his starfighter to the temple, so instead he leaned against a wall and calmed Master Yoda. "Hey, Master Yoda," Anakin said. "Palpatine's, Sidious. You know, the Sith we have been searching for." Yoda, on the other end of the line, was in the middle of consuming what he called his water of life, a mix of Death Stick fluid and concentrated spice from Nar Shaddaa. Normally, Yoda consumed this concoction in moderation, but after the Kashyyyk debate had dragged on endlessly, he had taken a much larger dose than usual, leaving him jittery and filled with restless energy. He needed an outlet, something to direct all this excess energy towards. He didn't even question whether Anakin was certain. He simply wanted Palpatine to be the Sith so that he could finally have an excuse to destroy something with unrestrained fury. Hearing Anakin's revelation, Yoda's eyes widened, his pupils dilating as a wild grin spread across his face. Without saying a word, Yoda jumped to his feet, running straight for the temple's hangar. He needed action, he needed to destroy the Sith, and he needed to do it now. He jumped into a speeder, his tiny frame barely visible behind the controls, and shot out of the hangar at breakneck speed, his heart pounding with adrenaline. "Destroy the Sith, I will," he shouted to no one in particular, his voice filled with manic energy as he sped towards the executive building, ready for whatever lay ahead. Yoda soon arrived at the executive building, his speeder skidding to a halt, with an energy only matched by the madness coursing through his veins. He jumped out, his diminutive frame moving with the speed and urgency that seemed almost supernatural, eyes wide and hands trembling in excitement. Anakin stood by the landing platform, his vision hazy from the Death Stick fluid he'd just downed. His lightsaber, now empty of the hidden stash, dangled from his belt. The night became a blur of lights and indistinct voices to the Chosen One, thanks to the Death Sticks, and all Anakin could focus on was the strange, insistent, tugging sensation in his chest, a nagging feeling that something was happening, something he should understand, but he didn't. Yoda rushed up to Anakin. "Come with me, Skywalker. Destroy the Sith. We must." His words were charged, almost vibrating in the air, fueled by pure adrenaline and spice. Anakin blinked slowly, not comprehending. He wasn't even sure it was Yoda standing in front of him. Wasn't it just some very intense little guy at this party he was at, Anakin thought. He stared blankly for a moment, then shrugged, stumbling after the small green figure without another word. They made their way through the hallways of the building, Anakin staggering aimlessly behind as Yoda practically skipped, his steps light and jittery. To any onlookers, the sight would have been bizarre. Yoda, a whirlwind of barely controlled energy, and Anakin, a slumped, dazed figure, trying and failing to keep pace. Finally, they arrived at Palpatine's office. Yoda wasted no time. With a sudden forceful kick, the doors flew open, and without missing a beat, Yoda screamed, a high-pitched, ear-shattering noise. It was a primal scream, the spice and force blending together, turning Yoda into something wild, something beyond what anyone had seen before. He lunged at Palpatine, his lightsaber igniting with a furious snap hiss, a whirlwind of light and energy. The scream Yoda let out was the same scream Anakin had heard in that strange vision he had, but he didn't connect the dots. Instead, he stood there, swaying on his feet, trying to make sense of the flashing lights and noises around him. It almost felt like he was in a nightclub, a cacophony of colors and sounds blending together. He smiled stupidly, wanting to join the dance. Palpatine, utterly unprepared for Yoda's arrival, had barely managed to summon his red saber in time. His face twisted in shock and rage. He had no idea Yoda had been on Coruscant, let alone that he'd be here now. Yoda had kept himself hidden, avoiding any media exposure to dodge being labeled lazy, or worse, irrelevant. And now, here he was, his small form moving like a blur, attacking with a relentless fury. Palpatine tried to counter Yoda's onslaught, their lightsabers clashing in brilliant flashes of red and green. But Yoda was beyond what Palpatine had anticipated, a creature of pure need, driven by the spice, by the dark promise of destruction. Mid-fight, Yoda produced another saber, wielding both with a skill that bordered on the supernatural. He spun, a blur of green energy, a force-fueled tornado of lightsabers. Palpatine struggled, every move of his being pushed to the limit, and he knew he was failing. Palpatine called out to Anakin, trying to reach the connection he believed they shared. "Anakin, help me. Together, we can end this." But Anakin didn't respond. He didn't even seem to understand what was happening. In his mind, this all looked like a strange party, full of flashing lights and chaos. He smiled, wanting to be part of the fun, and began to walk towards the center of the action. But instead, he stumbled into a statue, a massive stone likeness of Sistros Nevat. The impact made him fall, the statue toppling with him, and Anakin laughed as he hit the floor, dazed and disoriented. He pushed himself up, trying to stand, then leapt forward, but misjudged the distance and collided with a wall, knocking himself unconscious. He slumped to the ground, completely oblivious to the battle raging on. Seeing this, Palpatine knew he had to escape. He shattered one of the windows with a powerful blast of the Force and leapt out, gliding away with the agility of a man who had survived countless attempts on his life. But Yoda wasn't going to let him go. Not now, not when his adrenaline and spice-driven mind was locked on his target. Yoda tapped into the Force, his mind sharpening from the spice surging through him. He reached out to the nearby speeder pilots, as Palpatine had flown dangerously close to a sky traffic lane. The proximity worked in Yoda's favor. He sent a single, clear command to the pilots. Crash into the flying old man in the sky. One of the pilots, flying a speeder close to the executive building, felt the command, and without hesitation, turned towards Palpatine. Palpatine saw the approaching speeder just in time, twisting his body to avoid the collision, feeling the rush of wind as it barely missed him. He smirked, thinking he'd outmaneuvered Yoda's attempt. But Yoda had planned this. The first speeder was only meant to put Palpatine into position. Now, with the spice amplifying his connection to the Force, Yoda reached out again, 6 more pilots, each one feeling the command to converge. Palpatine had no time to react. In an instant, 6 speeders barreled towards him from different directions, and he was caught in the crossfire. The impact was immediate, a bright flash of fire and metal, as the Sith Lord was obliterated. The speeders collided, a massive pileup forming in the sky, debris raining down on Coruscant. Palpatine was gone, destroyed in an instant, the culmination of Yoda's manic plan. Yoda watched, his eyes wide, his breathing heavy, the spice still pumping through his veins, his mind still racing. He had done it. He had destroyed the Sith. And yet, as the adrenaline began to fade, as the world around him slowly settled, a strange emptiness filled him. He turned back to see Anakin, unconscious against the wall, and shook his head. A mess this has become, Yoda muttered to himself, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Yoda quickly came up with a plan. He needed to cover his tracks and create a narrative that would absolve the Jedi of any wrongdoing. He reached for the spice he had stored in his walking stick, along with the death stick residue from Anakin's lightsaber. Carefully, Yoda planted them in Palpatine's office, scattering the evidence where it could easily be found. Once Yoda was satisfied, he alerted the Coruscant media, officials, clones, and the Jedi Council. It didn't take long before Palpatine's office was swarming with investigators. Soon after, Yoda stood before a crowd of reporters and holorecorders. He and Anakin had been escorted out of Palpatine's office after it was sealed for investigation, and now stood just outside for this impromptu interview. Yoda's expression was composed, his posture straight. He knew that controlling the narrative now was crucial. "Defeated, General Grievous has been," Yoda said, his voice steady. "Came here to request Chancellor Palpatine give up emergency powers. We did." He gestured toward Anakin, who was standing behind him, dazed with a large red bump on his head. Anakin gave a slow nod, barely aware of his surroundings. A reporter from the Coruscant Newsnet raised her voice, eager to follow up. "And what happened after that, Master Yoda?" Yoda sighed, as if recalling a tragic event. "Entered the Chancellor's office we did, without alerting the Chancellor's aides. Because of this, expect us, he did not. Found the Chancellor in midst of activities illicit, we did, Yoda said, his voice lowering as if in embarrassment. Death sticks and spice doing he was. Refused arrest, the Chancellor did. Broke the window he did, and shouted, "Never catch me alive, you will." Yoda then paused. And? Another reporter asked. Catch him alive, I did not, he said with deliberate emphasis. He then turned to Anakin. Anakin nodded gently, his eyes glazed over, as if acknowledging Yoda's words. A reporter from some holotube channel then turned to Anakin, pointing at the large bump on his head. What happened to your head, General Skywalker? She asked. Before Anakin could respond, Yoda stepped. Attacked, the Chancellor did. Tried to save him from jumping out the window, young Skywalker did. Anakin, still dazed, simply nodded again, his expression blank. The media erupted, flashes from cameras capturing the moment, headlines already forming in the minds of journalists. Yoda remained silent, his gaze fixed forward, knowing that the story they had just spun would shape the future of the Republic and keep the Jedi safe, at least for now. So what would happen after this? Well, Yoda would eventually become the Kwisatz Haderach, granting him foresight into the dangers the clones posed. Meanwhile, Padme took Anakin to Naboo, where he slowly regained his sense of self. Ahsoka, after some reflection, decided to rejoin the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan, seeking some peace, took a much-needed vacation to Mustafar. Meanwhile, Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, and Shak Ti went out to shop for 2 new chairs for the Jedi Council. The end.